On this episode of A State of Control, we talk about the perception of AV control programmers, what contributes to their image, when do they say no, and how do they impact their future long-term. This and more on A State of Control.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
Support for AVNation is brought to you by Crestron Electronics.
A State of Control, episode 35, Software Bonnaroo.
This is A State of Control.
Welcome to A State of Control, an AVNation podcast that highlights the control, automation, and programming areas of the audiovisual industry. I'm your host, Steve Greenblatt. Thanks for joining us. Our topic today is something that I hope everybody finds interesting, and I think we'll have a little bit of fun with. And what it is it's the perception of the control system programmer. And with me today are two friends and more regulars on the show. I'm going to first start off with my regular sidekick, Uncle Rich Fregosa from Fregosa Design. Thanks for joining us today, Rich.
Mellow West Coast greetings. It's kicking into summer out here, so we'll go from warm to just warm. So
we actually put the heat back on for some strange reason because we're back to fall in the Northeast. And next, a friend who I don't get a chance to spend enough time with, his name is Marc LaVecchia from BMA Software Solutions. Thanks for joining us today, Marc.
Thanks for reaching out and having me on. Happy to be here, always.
Thanks for being here. So we all know that programmers, control system programmers, that is, come in different shapes and sizes. They have different skill sets and different roles from company to company. And because of this, I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding as to what is the effectiveness and how to gauge the role of a control system programmer. Some people think that this is the person that is the go-to person on a project, and they're the problem solver, and they're the key to making a project successful. And others think that they're the holdup in trying to get a project done. So I'll start with you, Rich. We've both been doing this for a long time. How do programmers get such vast and varying identities?
yeah, I think a big part of it is that it's such a huge kind of pit of different things that we do that sometimes the hardest part is explain. The hardest answer to the simple question is, what is it you do? It's like, well, what am I doing today? Control systems programming, it's this segment that isn't something that they necessarily touch or smell or taste. I mean, they'll see the screen and they'll see a panel and they'll see all the devices down the line, but there's almost this voodoo that happens in between. And because it's not something necessarily that people can see you putting in, they see a guy basically sitting at a laptop screen or pushing a button somewhere and they're going, that's it? It's very difficult to explain kind of everything that got up to that point. We've always had an inferiority complex over that in that respect, which was like, I do this stuff, I'm responsible for everybody's work, but it's the Rodney Dangerfield. I don't get no respect over it. We've struggled with it forever. Even now, it's like programming is part of what we do. But immediately, whenever I wind up on the side, even though I'm the business owner or I've been managing the project and everything else, I'm the programmer. And you just kind of, comes a certain point, you kind of shrug your shoulders over that. And, I think in residential, depending on how you're dealing with the client, you have a different opportunity to express yourself. I think in commercial, because you have technology managers and consultants, I think there's an opportunity for that to be a little bit more defined. But even then, I know that for the years, even with our own industry, we've had a hard time, kind of explaining who we are and what we do because we wind up doing so many things.
I definitely concur with that. And I like the fact that you touched on the idea that you make things look so easy, that means that it is easy. And usually that's what makes you good at what you do. So Marc, I'm going to jump over to you. How do programmers get a good image, and what contributes to the positive side of a control system programmer, and how do you build that reputation?
Well, I think it begins like it always does, which is with the end in mind. And what I mean by that is, we've talked about this quite a bit, but it plays a big role. If you're bringing in programmers at the end of a project, which has been part of the problem with programming over the years, is that, oh, there's a control system. This is supposed to be doing something. Let's quick, somebody come in here and program it. And then things don't work. And they look at the program and they go, well, it was fine before you showed up. What happened? And over the years, we've managed to, through the independent programmers, I'm confident, have been able to get to the beginning of the project, whether it's with the integrator, with the end user, with the consultant, whoever it is. You see them more and more coming in and going, look, we're going to have this control system here. It does a lot of things. Let's talk about what it is you expect it to do. And once those expectations are set, then at the end, when those expectations are met, then that ability to say, wow, that was pretty cool, is there. Now, I would also add to this that I think it's important to be a successful programmer. I think it's really important that you get out of the I need a pat on the back business. Okay, there are a lot of people who want to promote what they've done, and I get that, and that's important. But we shouldn't be doing what we do for the sake of having somebody talk how great we are. What we should do is go into it with the understanding that we want everybody to have the best experience, so that when they're done, they're going to come back to us. I've always felt that we've done our job when the job is done and nobody comes back to us and says, hey, wow, wait, we don't need that. What we need is to have a job done well. And if you do it well with a focus on taking care of the customer and giving everybody the best experience, in the end, nobody's going to say anything negative or poorly about you. And maybe they're not going to say anything at all. And sometimes that's not a bad thing from my perspective. It may be different for some.
So with that in mind, and I think that what you're saying makes a lot of sense. How far do you go? What in order to make the job go well? And what responsibilities do you take on that may or may not be within the realm of actual programming?
Well, I will tell you this. There's two parts to that question. It's a really good question. There's two parts to that question. You're asking this question about programming, but we want to break out when we talk about programming. Who are we talking about? Are we talking about the programmer that's independent on their own, like we are, the three of us? Or are we talking about the programmer that works for the integrator, commercial or residential, that's going to be going in the field and doing this project? Okay, that's two different approaches. From the independent standpoint, the approach is always important for us to make sure that we are in the beginning of the project, not just explaining and understanding what our role is going to be, but where it's going to be. Okay, a lot of people think, well, we're done, let's bring in the programmer. That's not where we want to be. And so if we're able to define in the beginning what role we're going to have in this, which is to say, and I do this with all new customers, here's the thing. You're not just getting a program, okay? What you're getting is a partner. We're going to be reviewing the drawings with you. We're going to be meeting with you and the customer to go over the functionality. We're going to be doing all the submittals and the modifications until we get approval on how this system is supposed to work. Then we're going to, if, for example, we have a weird piece of equipment, we're going to set up that equipment in-house and we're going to modify a module and tweak to make sure that we can make that thing work, so when we get into the field, everybody doesn't have to watch that sausage. Okay. Then the next part of it is we're going to come in, we're going to commission, and we're going to test, and we're going to be there. And when we get all done, we're going to walk through and commission the system step by step, button by button with you, to make sure that everything we agreed to in the beginning is what you're getting in the end. But you need to explain that, because if you don't explain that to people, the perception of you're the programmer, I'll see you when we're almost done, is a reality in a lot of places, which is why integrators lose programmers, because they burn them out, sending them to places without any plan or instruction. Just go make this work. Let me know when you're done. Does that make sense? Am I being clear on that?
Yeah, I think so. So, I mean, I think it's about trying to ensure your success. Take those steps up front to make sure that the outcome that you're going to get is there, and you kind of have to do all of the take on the responsibilities that are on the periphery of that.
That's correct. You need to be involved in all angles of this. You're not just the programmer. You're not. And if you think you're just a programmer, you're doing it wrong, as far as I'm concerned.
So, Rich, on kind of on that note, I think that, as Marc says, independent programmers maybe have a different perspective on things than in-house programmers, and I think one of the challenges that we face is that that role really can be vastly different. Can you kind of speak to any experience where you've been put into a situation and what you signed up for is different from what the customer is expecting? And I think by saying that, I think it's that many times a programmer wears different hats in different organizations.
I think that it's interesting when Marc brought up, we could almost label this show steps to being a successful programming company or a successful programming division. I mean, again, between the three of us, we've got a lot of years between us, and we've, what we're talking about right now, what Marc is specifically talking to, what you spoke to, what I speak to, is because we did it wrong for several years. A lot of times where we operated in ready, fire, aim. Where we came in because, again, almost to the core, and I think it's just because of the nature of programmers, and again, here comes the West Coast vibe again, but there's a lot of openness in terms of the code and sharing and being nice guys. It's odd to say, but generally I find that in the programming community, it's comprised of nice people because there's this service oriented personality that I found, because you're delivering. I mean, you are delivering that product, and it is part of that service industry, and it's just software happens to be the tools that do it. But to get back to my point, what it comes back to is when you're successful, you've discovered how important it is to manage the situation before you start and not try to triage the situation after things go south. And it comes back to establishing what your role is, explaining your role as best as you can, simplifying it so that they understand it, because it's about creating the value proposition. A good programming company, whether an independent, whether a division within an integrator, whether it's the programming group themselves, shows where they add value to the process. And like Marc said, sometimes their value is they're invisible. They're the kind of the ninjas that come in and come out. If you're doing your job well, I've always said, if I've done my job well, I am completely taken for granted, because everybody looks at me and goes, anybody could have done that. What did I bring you in for? And that is that backhanded compliment. You have to be willing to say that's, you played within yourself. Marc's brought that up a couple of times in terms of sports analogy. But the companies, that play within themselves, that know what they're good at, focus on what they're good at, and execute on that. And where it comes back to the hardest part, honestly, and where I had my most growth in terms of my company, and Marc knows me back from my early days in my career, is I had the hardest time saying no. It was just always yes, yes, yes. We'll figure out a way. I don't know how we're going to do it yet, but let's. It's like we're gonna put together a play, and here we go. It's like we're staging. It's like our own software Bonnaroo. Let's just get everybody together and see what happens. But as you mature as a business, the first successful thing that you build on is learning to play within yourself, and when you say no. No, this isn't working because it will affect the project. It will affect our relationship, and it will affect the outcome. And it's not, no, I'm walking away and treating it as a prima donna, but no, I am here to protect you from yourself. And that's where the biggest change for me was finally being able to sit down with clients saying, you've hired me for a reason. And my reason for being here is to protect you from yourself first and foremost. To take this experience, what we've done in the past, and I know it seems like a good idea, but I'm already looking down the line, 3 months, 6 months, a year down the line. And I can already tell you that this is not a road we want to go. I'm trying to prevent a bad situation. Now, You're an educated person. You're a bright person. It is now up to you to decide whether you believe me or not. I'm not going to come back and say, I told you so. But at the very least, I'm going to lay everything out to allow you to make that decision and let, the technology manager, whoever's responsible for the scope and sequence to report back on, the homeowner, the interior designer. I mean, anybody who's involved in that process, bringing them in. So, I mean, it's a roundabout way of saying that, really learn to say no and learn how to stand up for what your company does. Because if nothing else, the lost opportunity cost from getting away from that is what kills you.
I didn't mean to jump on you, Rich.
No, go ahead.
Because he's absolutely right here. And if you don't get anything else out of this podcast today, listen to what he's saying. You need to be, if you want to be successful at this, you need to not only be able to say no, but not compromise that, because that's what some people do. They go, look, this doesn't make sense. And so what happened? Let me try to give you more of a real world application. I have a customer. They come to me. They go, we have this system. We've done it. The program isn't working. The programmer is gone. He's run out of money. He's blah, blah, blah. Everybody on this call had this happen to them. I'm in a jam. I need this to work. Can you please come make it work? I need somebody at the site tomorrow. Now, immediately our response is no, we don't just go to a job site, number one. Number two, what's wrong? Well, there's just these things. What things? Well, when you turn this on, it doesn't work. Well, what are you talking about? Well, if you just come out, no, I'm not just coming out, but everybody's upset and they're yelling and they're going to lawsuits and lawyers and bears, oh my. And you're like, well, okay, but in the end, we can't fix what we don't know. So what we need to do is we need to be able to understand the whole scope of this project. Well, if you're just not going to work with us, then that's just the way that it's going to be. Well, I'm sorry, but the answer is no. And the answer is no is because you're not taking the approach to do this properly. And we are the idea of always saying yes, the customer comes first. We must take care of the customer. We must take care of the industry. We want this industry to thrive, so we all must do our best. I mean, saying no, and we say no a lot. And a lot of people don't like it. They don't appreciate it. But in the end, they come back ultimately and go, oh, man, we had to gut it, start it all over. Sorry, should have listened to you. Again, it's not a question of, gee, I told you so, because there's no money and I told you so. But if you would stop to recognize that we're not just code writers, but we're business people who are trying to manage the process with you, you're going to find everybody's going to make money at the end of this thing.
And it also, again, let's say you're not, let's say you are the owner of the company, or you're a programmer working for the company. This is what burns people out, and Marc spoke about it earlier. There's only so many times that you can go to the well and again, we've had it on projects and where we've got an all hands on deck and everybody's grinding away and, we're working in shifts and, there's that excitement that comes from projects like that. I mean, absolutely for me, there's always been that adrenaline rush of the pressure and the deadline and everything else in that weird masochistic sense. But you can only do that. You can only maintain that for so long. And if that happens repetitively, morale just starts going down. Because again, it's like everything's a crisis. Here we go again. And as a company, when you react that way, your employees know when you start crying wolf. We've seen it before. I've had that in with a prior company is that, it was, I would sometimes have to interpret when things weren't a crisis to the rest of my team. Because although from other directions it was coming in as a crisis, it was like, no, it's not. Everybody's just completely freaking out. And typically in projects where any programmer is involved, there's a budget, there's usually somebody at the very tail end of this who is used to being told yes to whatever they ask for, right? In residential and for high-end residential, typically these are the CEOs, these are the owners, these are the investment bankers, these are the venture capitalists. They don't like no. So they are surrounded by people who constantly tell them yes. And one of the biggest lessons that I learned was from one of my clients, is that if nothing else, he may not have always liked what I said, but he respected me that I stood up for it. And I didn't just try to please him. We worked through it and we explained it. And it goes back, and it's a tough lesson. But from a business standpoint, and even as an employee, you're going to prolong your career, if nothing else, just by reducing the stress, because you will burn yourself out after a period of time. You lose the joy for what you were doing in the first place. And that is something that we don't always touch on. You know, we always talk about the project, we always talk about your income and everything else, but, you know, you still go home to your family. You know, you've still got your significant other, your kids, all of these other things in terms of the rest of your work-home balance life. And once you start making that balance in your professional life as a programmer, you know, it becomes this whole cycle. And again, like I said, I'm getting kind of earthy crunchy over it, but you know, it does over the course of, you know, and again, not the first year, but after 5 years, again, like we were just saying with Marc, it's like you see so many people go, well, the programmer left, he ran out of money. Why? Because he got burnt out because they were doing it wrong.
And you know what, Steve? How long have we been talking about this, or how much have we been talking about this lately when we're together socially and hanging out? This is a trend that Rich is talking about that is critical to what's going on right now. And I think more and more integrators, more and more customers are starting to come to the understanding that programmers really need, and I'm simplifying this, but you've heard me say it before, programmers essentially need two key components: their brain, because they operate in a different way than a lot of people in terms of being able to program, and their hands. And if you get rid of either one of those things, you're not going to have a program. Okay? So when you burn that noggin out, then you've lost a critical part of what you're doing. So one of the key things that we try to do, and this is not being self-promoting, this is just a conversation Steve and I have had many times that you just hit on, Rich. One of the things that we promote internally, we try to as best as we can, is quality of life. I'm not talking about quality of life in the field. I'm not talking about quality of life driving to a job site. I'm talking about quality of life at home. Because as we spend more and more time in this business, we get older. And the older we get, the closer we get to realizing that we're mortals. And then we start realizing what's really important to us. While we want to do a good job, and we want to be respected, and we want to be paid, and we want to do all those things, in the end, I don't go home to my business partner. I come home to my wife and to my son. And that, to me, is the core of all that I do. And if we can take that with the programmers and apply that to them, then you will find that they will tend to work harder for you, knowing that that wheel that we're spinning so hard right now isn't going to be spinning like this on a regular basis. Let me give you another point to this, Steve. I think you may have seen the article that came out in Commercial Integrated today or yesterday about one of the integrators in Southern California. And one of the things that I know about, I've known about them since they've gone into integration, is they want this to be a place where people enjoy working. Quality of life has always been a big deal to them. When you read that article about them, when you read that article, what are they talking about? You can take your money and spend it somewhere, but in the end, we're trying to create memories for these people, and we're trying to encourage them to enjoy where they work. Because in the end, there's money, and then there's your life. And you want to have that life as a priority. And we're seeing that trend in the business quite a bit, which is very good for programmers. That's not great for owners, because a lot of them, they need to make their nut. And so they're going to push a job that maybe they shouldn't. And that's where we come in. At least we as independent owners can say, I'm not going down that road with you. My guys are tired. I've been working real hard. I have to take a pass on this job. That's a bold thing to do. But if you do it, then the people that work with you respect that, and they will pedal faster when the time comes.
And this goes back to, you know, kind of we sort of kind of came off the side, which was the perception of programmers. But what Marc was just talking about is that's how we change the perception. We brought this upon ourselves, you know, when we first started out. And again, you know, control systems programming, you know, we've been doing it roughly 32 years now. I mean, if you trace it all the way back to, you know, the very first relay controller to push forward a slide projector, right? You know, that was kind of the first thing that we had to, we trace it back. We know pretty much when, you know, it's like we had the first atom of control system programming that came out. You know, of those 30-something odd years. Each of us have been doing it 20, 25 years. So we cut our teeth in the beginning, and we didn't know what we didn't know when we started out. And as the industry has changed, and when we started in the infancy as control systems programmer, we're heading into that adolescence now. And how that happens now is that perception, which is now they're real companies. Now we're a real company. Now we're a real profession. Now we're not just the guy who shows up with a laptop and shows up on site and everybody goes, oh no, the programmer's here, and sits there for 5-6 days on end, right? Because that was the way we all did it, because we didn't have remote access. Right? And you didn't, you had a giant computer. You didn't have, when I first started, I didn't have a laptop. We literally carted around large PCs.
I think I've actually seen a photo of Richie at the age of 14 with a Fisher-Price laptop.
With a Fisher-Price laptop, pretty much. And that's where we stand with as this industry is we are moving into our adolescence. We see it with the CDA channel. We see it with, I think the commercial industry is just more established in that respect, in that earlier on people put down their foot and said, no, this is what we do. This is who we are. And, it came from the consultants to the integrators and everything else. Residential came on, and again, you have a mix of residential programmers and commercial programmers. So you have a little bit of a lag that's occurred in that standpoint. And I think more and more, and like what you guys have been doing with technology managers, with Crestron putting on masters, with AMX and their VIP program, with everybody opening up and saying, no, we need to continue to legitimize what we offer. And that's where the changes in the perception come, because a lot of it was of our own making. And it was from business owners who said, oh, you know what, this is a great job. They're going to pay us time and a half. We just have to have it done by Sunday. And everybody keeps going for that brass ring, and it just builds on itself and builds on itself and builds on itself. So, where it stands now, again, we were saying the only advice that we could offer, in all the years of doing it wrong and hemorrhaging money and the stress and everything else that goes with it, is value yourself, as a company, value yourself as an individual. You obviously, if you're doing this, you're not a dim-witted individual. But we as an industry, as a segment of the industry, have to kind of stand up, and do kind of our network. I'm mad as heck, and I'm not going to take it. But I'm oversimplifying it. But that is part of it. And I think that we're seeing more of it. I know that I've aggressively championed it on the residential side. I know you guys do on the commercial side. The big part now is we need more voices, more active voices who are saying this is how this works, and we're seeing it. And I think the manufacturers are understanding it too, and they're trying to support it.
Yeah, and I think Steve, we'll let you talk in a minute.
That's fine.
But I think that one of the
Steve may be the best host, but I'm not. But Marc LaVecchia is the best Crestron talker of all time.
This is what we. One of the things that I think for us is we face on a regular basis, and we've been facing for as long as we've been doing this, is we've heard people saying, "You programmers, your days are done. Your days are done. Everything's going to be plug and play soon, and nobody's going to need you." And we hear it more and more lately, don't we? Everybody's trying to figure out where the business is going to go and how are we going to get there and what's going to be next. But the only thing they all seem to be coming back to is programmers are going to play a role in this. It may not be the traditional, here's your touch panel layout and so forth. But what we are finding now more than anything is people are trying to figure out what they want the system to do, not necessarily what this piece of equipment can do. And when you break away from that, you realize that there's got to be software in there in order to make these things do what people want it to do. And so I think that from a programmer standpoint, whatever respect that we deserve or don't deserve, or however we're perceived in the business, I have a sneaking suspicion that people are over the next 4 or 5 years are going to be turning to the established independent programmers, especially, and say, we really need to partner with you. We need to be friends here because we're going down a road that needs you to write certain languages, write certain interfaces that we're just not familiar with. It's no longer, here's your handheld remote, go turn on the TV. That's not what we're dealing with anymore. Would you agree with that, Rich?
Oh, I'm totally with you on that. I think that the industry itself, and I mean, we've been in the resi side, we've been throwing around the term technologist, but that's really it. Is that it is the programming is one of the tools that you have available to you. But every programmer that's out there right now has at least a basic networking background, has to have a rudimentary knowledge of audio video, has troubleshooting skills.
Yeah.
I mean, when you kind of strip everything away, they're the super utility infielder. The programming is definitely what got them in the door. But there's all these other things that they're responsible for, that they wind up being responsible for to help the team get along. And I think that's where we're seeing more of it being promoted, which is yes, we provide programming, however. And that's always been our entry, which is absolutely programming is what we do. However, there's a whole lot of other things that are going on, and there's time and value and experience associated with that. And by the way, here are the fees that are associated with it. Or you can go find 3 or 4 other people to do it, or you have a choice. You go one-stop shopping. That's what Marc's company brings. It's a one-stop shop, one call. Your company's able to bring that when it comes to anything that's related to that control systems interface. And so, again, I hope, I think we keep getting mixed messages in the industry right now, and I've gotten calls from people going, oh my gosh, what are we going to do next year? There's not going to be any more. If you're good, you likely will have more work because of the way that things are becoming fractured. We are spreading out even more as opposed to unifying, because now, instead of it just being a VCR and a TV and this, it all kind of operated rudimentarily the same way. You have all of these different network connected devices, and all 15 of them probably operate differently. And you need somebody, kind of with the one ring to bind them all to come in. And I think that's what Marc's talking to, is that we're the manufacturers and technology managers, everybody else is going, oh, wait a second, we didn't think about that part. Everybody sold us on it was going to be easy, but they didn't tell us how to make it easy.
So I'm going to have to put a bow on everything, but you guys made my job easy today. And I think that the lesson, the big takeaway that I got, and that I think maybe we should put out there to everyone, is that programmers need to create their own identity, and that starts by respecting yourself and what you do, and getting others to do the same. And I think that I'm glad that we even got to the point where we talk about what the future looks like. So another great show, and I thank you guys for being a part of it and making this go very smoothly. It was a quick 30 minutes, and let me start by thanking Marc for being here. And how can everyone get in touch with you and learn more about your company?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I really dig doing this in a groovy kind of way, and I love hanging with you guys and chatting about this stuff. I hope there's some value for the listeners there. You can reach us at bmasoftwaresolutions.com. It's the best way to reach us.
And how about your Twitter? Come on,
right? My Twitter, it's such a mess right now. Social media stuff is just look at Marc LaVecchia, and you'll find me in there making fun of the Buffalo Bills or something like that.
Excellent. And Rich, thanks for being here as usual. And how can everyone get in touch with you and learn more about your company?
My pleasure. Oh, as usual, I'm sure our moderator cringes when they see Marc and I together on the same show, because they know Uncle Richie and Uncle Marc are going to spin a yarn as long as we're allowed. You can find me on Twitter at @Fregosa, fregosadesign.com, obviously here or on Resi Week. And also, hey, InfoComm's coming up. Great opportunity for exactly what we were talking about, the opportunity to get out, be among your peers. CD is coming up in a couple of months as well. If, programming companies or independents or integrators are kind of on the fence, send your people. This is exactly how you change that, getting everybody amongst one another. So, that's my holistic advice on that one here from the West Coast.
Excellent. Well, it's a good thing we didn't have another guest, because they wouldn't have been able to get more than about a minute in. But I think to your point, Rich, and I'll be real quick about it, for those of you that missed our last episode about Crestron Masters, and one of the big impacts that it had on me was the fact that much of the learning and much of the value of it came out of the community, not necessarily what was being taught. And I think that was a big takeaway. And I think it speaks to what you're saying, Rich, and also it gives motivation for everyone to throw their hat in the ring and get out and be a part of this industry, whether it's at a trade show or getting involved in an organization. My name is Steve Greenblatt. I've been your host. You could reach me on social media at Steve Greenblatt, or my company, Control Concepts, at controlconcepts.net. But most importantly, go by the AVNation website, avnation.tv. Go check out this show, as well as many of the other shows, the weeklies, Resi Week and AV Week, and some of the monthlies, Ed Tech, Connected, the ITAV show. They're all great, and I think that they all have some relevance to this audience. Also check out the underwriters. They are the ones that make this show possible. So thank you for being a part and joining us today. And until next time, this has been State of Control.